be recording this. So welcome to all of you that are here. I'm excited to learn with you all regarding the concept and issues and all of the pieces related to cultural humility. So we have Len Adams, and he is from Tacoma Pierce County Health Department, which is in Washington State. And I actually was at an event in the Seattle area and really literally stumbled across some folks from Tacoma that are doing some really interesting work. And so engaged them for this presentation, as well as we're gonna have a subsequent one on participatory budgeting. This presentation is part of our community of practice around community engagement. We felt like this is a really important concept that you all are exposed to, and we're in learning about it. So Len has a lot of work that he's done very deeply in community organizing and authentic community engagement since 1997. And from 1997 to 2005, he worked at the Pacific Science Center in Seattle as community leadership supervisor and a project supervisor there for Origins, which is a NOVA special. He's worked as a health promotion coordinator, and now I think he's in a leadership role around community engagement, and prioritizes health equity issues and community-based social marketing and Lean Six Sigma and related strategies. So I'm excited. That's quite a variety of experience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Len.
All right, thank you so much. That's all true every week. I had a great time working at Pacific Science Center, and a lot of my growing up took place in families in a learning situation, and learning just became part of who I am. I think is how that ended up. And I did some work in gaining a master's in education, largely because of my experience at Pacific Science Center. So that was a pretty foundational experience for me. If you ever get a chance to go to Seattle, so it's one of the very fun places to go and visit. And I have some slides to share with you all, and I think you can see them. There should be a slide up that says the title of this program and has my name and the date on it.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Awesome. Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll start going through those, and let's see. And I'm going to learn how to change the slides. There we go. My work here at the health department has been largely working with grown-ups in improving health. My first job here at the health department was working with property managers, and we did a project with a lot of property managers in Pierce County so that they could learn things to help keep their apartments more healthy for the residents. And they had lots of questions about things like mold and pesticides and all sorts of different things. So we worked with them to identify what their priorities were and try to get them good quality information so they could keep their properties nice and helpful. And so that was my first experience in public health, working a lot with indoor air quality that it ended up being. And my first experience working with things like race and culture were both at Pacific Science Center and in the city of Seattle. The city of Seattle did a lot of work around identifying race as an important feature of their work and helping staff become comfortable speaking about race and how it affects their work and how it affects their residents. And so that's, for me, those are some of the foundational experiences I've had in all this. And I'm just kind of curious from the folks of you who are here, what words come to you when you think of cultural competency? And if you have the chat box open, you can just type your messages there, or you can say it out loud. So some words that come to you as you think of cultural competency.
Oh,
I don't know, Lynn, if you can see, I can help by reading, but we have attitudes, knowledge, and skills and interactions.
Okay. Anything else?
It implies there's a point where you are competent.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, and it's a continuous process.
Okay. So understanding, respectful. Oh, I see those. Ongoing reflection. So I have a second question for you all. My second question is, if you were to imagine a spectrum of cultural competency that ranges from, I don't know, 0 to 10, where 0 is not competent at all, and 10 is this implied fully competent, where do you think you'd place yourself? And you can, I suppose we can just imagine our answers. I know that's kind of an awkward question to answer in front of in a setting like this. So sometimes when I do this exercise, it's a smaller group of folks. But okay, 2, maybe a 7. Okay. So it's an interesting concept, right? Because it does imply that there's a top end and a beginning end. And so we'll take a look at, we'll keep this in the back of our head as we go through some of the other concepts in this. And the place where we're gonna start is by taking a look at what we think of when we try to imagine our best practices. So if you could imagine just for a minute a visitor coming to your facility, and I don't know exactly what all your facilities look like, but imagine somebody coming to your facility, and I'd like you to consider what your vision is for the experience that this person has when they come to your building and interact with your staff. And if you have something to jot down with, maybe you could take a couple notes, because this is something we'll come back to again later on. You don't have to put it in the group chat. You could if you wanted, I suppose. But some notes in front of you would be a nice place to keep that. And I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. Okay, 5 more seconds. All right, that's a quick and dirty summation of what you hope to, what you're striving for your organization. So I imagine it's incomplete, and maybe you have other things to add to it. But that's where we're going to start working from. And I'm curious to find out, how does this vision change based on who the person is visiting you? Like, what kind of things might change about this vision of interaction depending on who the person is? So for me at my organization, we're a county health department, and I envision that people that come to visit us are comfortable here, and they get the service that they need to keep themselves healthy. And sometimes that means a permit of some sort. Sometimes that means some information. It can mean a variety of different things. And for us here at the health department, that can change based on a number of different things, like what language they speak, or their gender, or where they live in the county. And the point of this little thought exercise is to start taking a look at culture, right? And so when I think of culture, there's some big things that I can think of, like race is one of the components of culture, or ethnicity. Sometimes race and ethnicity are used interchangeably. Religion is often another thing that gets cited pretty early on in terms of culture. What other kind of things, when you think of culture, what other kind of things do you think of? And if you want to, you can type in the box, or you can just say it out loud. Other signs or signals of culture, other expressions of culture. Sexuality and gender, tradition.
Mhm. I think of the like historical, I think maybe along what Allison, like the context of the community.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, super important. Clothes we wear, the dress, what we eat,
Mhm.
food. Uh, Individuals experiencing homelessness, various beliefs we hold. Yeah, so as we can see, there's a whole bunch of different things that contribute to our various cultures. Some of these you'll notice are pretty visible. Like if there was a special kind of clothing that I wore, like if I was part of I don't know, a biker club. You know, there's leather jackets and there's different things that I would use to identify myself as a member of a biker organization, right? And so people could see that and they could tell right away. There's also a lot of things that we're talking about here that are not quite so visible. Right? Things that are I guess it would be difficult to tell somebody's beliefs just by looking at them, right? Um, and one component that comprises culture is an aspect of something we call race. And race is something that is an important aspect of my work as a community engagement person working in public health. Um, and it's important enough for my organization to spend money to fund a number of positions to help our staff become more familiar with the implications of race and become more competent in talking about race. And so I have a real quick exercise for you all. I'm wondering if to yourselves, if you could write down a really quick definition of race, like answer the question, what is race, by starting the sentence, race is, and you can finish that. I'd also like you to consider how many races there are. And I wonder if anybody'd mind sharing either the definition or the number of races they came up with. Race is kind of a tricky thing sometimes. We don't often get asked to talk about race when we go home for our various meals. It's one of the topics that are sometimes we don't really get asked to talk about. But for our work in public health, it can be a pretty important thing for us to become more familiar with. And so race is a social construct. Um, Not sure how many races there are. Race is a group of humans based on physical, social qualities. Race is what dominant culture sees and classifies as who you are. Yeah. So there's lots of different ideas about what race is. There are whole classes that spend days, multiple days, getting into the weeds about what race is and what race isn't. And for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to ask that you accept some of these things that I'm about to tell you about race. But some of the things that I've learned about race are that race is not biologically based. There's not a set of genes, or there's not a set of genomes that can separate one race from another. So that's an important thing to know about this. Race is it has a bunch of different definitions, and there sometimes is a temptation to suggest that there is one race, the human race, right? And that's biologically, that's how it is. That's a fact of biology. What that doesn't take into account is how our society treats race, right? So when we go out to fill out forms, like when we do our taxes, or when we do our driver's license, or do some sort of governmental forms, at some point on many of these forms, you're asked to check a box, right? And the box it asks you what your race is. And so our governments and our society as a whole recognize to some degree that there are differences between people that we can see and that we call race. And so on the one hand, so there's this really interesting dichotomy going on. On the one hand, there's this there's biology that says that we don't come from different races. There's an idealized sort of a aspect to our work that appeals to our good side. I'll say our ideal side that indicates that we want to say there is just one race. We're all part of the human race. But there's also these other remnants of our society that really still break down people into a variety of categories. And so that's an interesting thing to keep in mind as we go through this work, because as idealized as we want to make our work in public health, the people that we work with experience the forms from the government. They experience all these different mechanisms that break them into a variety of different types of people, different races. And so I think it's an important thing for us to keep in mind as we go through this. When we talk about race, there's different words that come up. Racism is a word that comes up, and for the purposes of this discussion, there's three types of racism that are really important, but I'll just go over really briefly. Again, there's classes that take you through this and go into a lot of detail about all these things. But one of the things that's important to consider is a form of racism called internalized racism, and that's when an individual experiences the world through the eyes of the world, and if the world values a person with darker skin less than a person with lighter skin, the darker skinned person adopts some of those same values and devalues themselves. And so there's a whole complicated process that goes on for some people of color, where they're adopting the dominant worldview of what their value is. So that's internalized racism. Interpersonal racism is what I think many people talk about when they talk about racism. And it's essentially one person being mean to another person or because of their perceived race. It's something we see on TV where somebody says bad things or doesn't hire people because of how they look or how they act. And it's a thing that's that is it's a concept that's easy to grasp, because it gets boiled down to there are good people and there are bad people, and good people don't exercise this type of racism, and bad people do. It's a really funny way to think of it, and I think it's not a very helpful way to think about racism. And the concept of interpersonal racism is important for us, because when we talk about racism, that's the thing that many people assume we're talking about. The thing that for my work and for our health department's work that has a bigger impact, though, a type of racism called institutionalized racism, or institutional racism, or structural racism. And I don't know if if you've had experience working with institutional racism. Essentially, it is a set of policies and a set of procedures that sort people in different categories, that treat different people differently by their race, and that is not something that is decided by a person, like a clerk or a health worker. It's something that's that's decided by the process, by the procedures. One big famous example of this is something called redlining. I don't know if you've come across redlining before, but a long time ago, back in the 1930s, there was a big effort to fund homes, to put more people in homes. And there was an organization, a federal government organization set up called the Home Loan Corporation. Part of their job was to come up with a set of guidelines to help banks provide loans for families. They came up with a set of maps, and there's a map for most of the major cities in the country. There's one for Tacoma. If you're interested in finding one for an area near you, I might be able to help you find a map of it for the area near you. What these maps did essentially was to break down the town into various subsections, and it rated the different parts of town by how much risk there was to the bank in loaning to these areas, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because banks, they don't want to risk their money, they want to put their money in a good, safe investment. The tricky, or the really unfortunate thing about this whole process was that one of the things that influenced whether part of town got a really good rating, or a green color, or an A rating versus a red color or a D rating, was the number of people of color in those areas. We know this because in addition to the maps, there are these data sheets to go with each of the parts of town. And if you look at some of these, the ones in Tacoma are really startling, because there's a description of the A area, and it talks about the beautiful views. You can see the water, you can see these lovely. When you look at the D section, it specifically calls out that this section of town is rated D, or the highest risk, specifically because of 3 Negro families that live in this area. And that's why, otherwise, this would have been a C, or maybe even a B, right? And so the thing about that is that I don't believe that any of these people that were making the maps or creating the guidelines, I don't think they were bad people. I don't think they were necessarily discriminatory in and of themselves, but they were creating this process that in the process contained elements that sorted people by race. And that was, it was hard for them to see. I suspect it was really difficult to see because they didn't have the perspective to step away and like we do. We look back and think, oh my goodness, how did they do that? And it's difficult to get any sort of perspective when you're right in the middle of things. And so that is an example of institutional racism, where the policies of who we could loan to and who we couldn't, who could pay higher rates, interest rates, ended up so that people of color ended up paying way higher interest rates if they could get loans at all. Because one of the other effects of this redlining policy was that banks really didn't lend much in the red areas. So, and so that spectrum of racism, when we're talking about racism, it really varies from really personally individual, how we treat ourselves, to how we treat others, to how society decides to treat our various residents. And that's an important thing to consider, because when we take a look at what affects health, like what makes somebody healthy, what makes some people not healthy, there's a whole variety of different reasons, right? When I talk about this in front of in workshops, one of the things that often comes up is that personal habits are a really big determining factor in somebody's health. Absolutely true, right? If you have somebody who's smoking versus somebody who's not smoking, the person who's smoking is at risk for all sorts of different things that the non-smoker it has low risk of. And so the smoker tends to have higher health risk. right? So that's a personal behavior. Somebody can choose to smoke or not smoke. I mean, I guess we could debate that, but there's things that one does to themselves that that can affect their health, like eating sugar or any number of things like that, right? Um, there are a whole host of other things, though, that it can influence how healthy somebody is. Your access to a doctor. Is there a doctor in your area? Not even can you pay for it, but is there actually physically a doctor in your area? Some of the other things that can influence your health are genetics, right? If my parents had certain illnesses that they could pass on through my genes, well, I'd be more likely to get that and suffer poor health. One of the things that we don't often recognize, though, is that there's this whole host of other things that influence our health that are sometimes called social determinants of health, right? And the things like how much money do you have? That goes a long way to determining where you can live, right? Can you afford a house that has the beautiful view and has clean water, or do you only have enough money to rent a place that is in an area that has a history of industrial pollution, right? And so that's one of the things. Education is another thing that is predictor of health. The more education you have, the better health you tend to have. And for many of us, getting through elementary school and middle school and high school, those are all publicly funded, right? But once you get past that, it becomes more difficult for some folks to pay for their education. And race ends up being another factor in this. People of different races experience health differently across our neighborhoods. And so this is a thing that we took a fair amount of time looking at our various neighborhoods to see where people were living longer and living shorter amounts of time. It was really surprising that we found, and we produced maps. And if you're interested later on, I can show you some of these maps. But the maps indicated that two neighboring zip codes would tend to produce people who lived, I forget how many it was, like 6 years longer or 6 years shorter than their neighbor. And so the things that tend to influence that are the things on this on the bottom part of this chart that you're taking a look at right now. It's what non-biological things can do to influence somebody's health. Right? For us here at the health department, this became really important, an important factor in how we decided to move forward with some of our work. When we looked at the maps where some people were living shorter periods of time than others, it became a priority for us to coordinate our work and focus our work in some of these neighborhoods. And so we've adopted these things called communities of focus. And in the areas where the life expectancy was shorter, we dedicated staff to coordinating our work in those areas. We didn't really generate new work so much as we took our existing work and guided them to these areas that were experiencing worse health outcomes. And the thing that led us to this conclusion was this awareness of these social and economic factors that historically had led to poor health, and it was our conclusion that these policies and different social mechanisms that led to poor health could be reversed if we dedicated time to try and reversing the effects of things like redlining. And this work really is only very possible if we can talk about race. That's one of the prerequisites that we found. We spent some time trying to work within the realm of health equity, and it only became effective when our staff became more comfortable talking about race. And so we started to adapt these different tactics and strategies, like communities of focus, to try to reverse some of the historical effects. And this activity, I kind of wondered if we could do this. I'm kind of thinking maybe we won't be able to do this activity, but I want to tell you about this because it has two different important parts for us. In our discussions about what race is, I asked you earlier what race was, and so you came up with definitions, right? This exercise is if you work with a group of people, like if you're going to take this and work with some of your colleagues in your organizations, this is an example of a type of work that that enables your clients, your customers, to have a louder voice and allows you to hear what they're saying. If we were in a big room, this is what I would do. I would ask you to pair up into groups of 2 or sometimes 3, depending. Sometimes our groups have odd numbers. I'd ask one of you I'd ask one of you to be a speaker and one of you to be a listener. The speaker, their job is to speak about a pump that I would give them. The listener has a job of trying to intake as much information as they can from the speaker. And their one limitation is they can't talk, like they can't contribute to the conversation. And that depending on the audience, I would ask different things. In this particular context, I might ask something like, who first explained race to you and how was it explained? And the one speaker would then begin talking about I first learned about race from my dad or whoever told them about race, and this is what he said, and this is what they told me about how race worked, and that's how I became familiar with it. The interesting thing about this exercise is that the speaker and the listener have pretty different experiences in this. The speaker oftentimes gets a little paralyzed because I give them 2.5 minutes to talk. And I don't know when the last time you talked for 2.5 minutes was, but I tend not to do that. I mean, right now I am because we're in this webinar, but in my normal life, I tend not to speak a lot. And so 2 minutes sounds like a long time, and it does sound like a long time to a bunch of people. Many people, when they do this, they find it a little liberating, and 2 minutes flies by, and it doesn't take very long, and they don't perceive the 2 minutes as taking very long, right? And so that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. From the listener's point of view, other really interesting observations come out. One of the things that often comes up is that I wanted to talk. I wanted to say, oh, that reminds me of the time when my dad did this, or contribute to the conversation. And they feel a little bound by not being able to talk. Another observation that often comes up is that that dynamic of not being able to talk, but to really just take in that information, set up this really interesting experience where the listener could fully listen and weren't trying to come up with a response or weren't trying to come up with a next story or to help contribute to the conversation, to provide some next stepping stone for the conversation, but they just took in all this information. And it's sometimes kind of a surprising realization that they can take in so much and they notice way more things if they're just focusing on listening rather than trying to come up with a response to whoever it is that they're working with. The thing that this exercise helps participants really talk about race and get a deeper understanding for why they think what they think about race. But for our purposes, in the larger context, this is an example of it's an example of community engagement is what it is. That's what I think of it as. We were earlier talking about what culture is, right? And it's all these different things. Some things we can see, some things we can't see. An exercise like this, where we draw information out of another human being, is a way that we can find out some of these cultural things that we didn't know before. We can find out if there are biases towards maybe the person likes dogs more than cats, or maybe the person likes apples or oranges. There's all sorts of things that can come out in this that we might not notice if we were contributing to a back and forth conversation, right? And so So the important part of this, or the thing that I try to leave folks with, is that um, when we leave space for someone to express themselves, oftentimes that space gets filled up with all sorts of really interesting and useful things that help us connect with that other person on a more on a deeper level and a more authentic level than sometimes we have time for. And I think that's a really valuable thing for our staff to work with. In terms of like our organization, we do this really same sort of thing when we hold focus groups. We're trying to take in information as opposed to distribute information. Or when we do surveys. So this is like a mini example of what a lot of community engagement is all about. And in my head, one of the main purposes of community engagement is to help us get a better handle on what our customers and what our clients are thinking and experiencing about something specific. Going back to our idealized version of what we want our clients, our customers to experience when they come to our facility, this sort of exercise helps us check in to see that our customers, our clients, are experiencing our facility in the way that we hoped. And if we're willing to listen to them, they can tell us what their experiences was with our facility and can help guide us to make decisions that will make our facility and our vision more closely match the reality of what's happening out there, right? Because if we don't ask, we'll just never know. And it's really easy to assume that if I hand somebody a brochure about flossing their teeth, that they're going to floss their teeth. Most of you probably know that rarely ever works. So there's lots of brochures about flossing your teeth, and how many people floss their teeth as often as you're supposed to? I think most people don't. Right. So checking in with your clients, with your residents, in a way similar to this is something that can make we feel it makes our work better, more closely aligned to the values that our residents have. And if we listen close enough, we can even start to use words that they use to describe the importance of our work. Right? I mean, I have all sorts of ideas about why I think my work is important, but if I can pull out those words from our residents, it resonates deeper than my words do, if that makes sense. So this is an example. This particular thing is sometimes called nonviolent communication. If you want to look more into nonviolent communication, it's a whole rich field about communicating in a way where you're really taking in more information than we normally do. So when we talk about cultural competency, we're talking about something that's more than understanding. We're talking about something that's more than tolerance. I don't know if you've ever gone into a new setting and felt tolerated versus accepted. Those are two pretty different things, right? And if we compare this back to what our ideal interaction is between our facility and our residents, I think most of us would want something that was more than just tolerance. And so the thing here to think about is, how do we value our different cultures? Of all the different people that interact with us and our facility, how do we value our different cultures? Do we? I think we probably do. I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. The important thing for us to think about is, how do we recognize that we're doing that? Like, what kind of indicators are there in our facility, in our handbooks, in our brochures, in our various communications that tell us that we value one culture more than another culture? One of the things that often comes up at this point is language. Right? So language is one of the things we talked about when we talked about what comprises culture. If our entire library of brochures or guidance documents or website or whatever it is we produce is all written in English, that speaks, that tells everyone that's looking at our organization that this organization values English, definitely values English. If we don't put some effort into creating some of these important documents in other languages, that also says something too, right? It indicates that we don't value some of these other languages as much as we value English. There's some subtlety in this. One of the things that we sometimes struggle with here in Tacoma is, okay, we want to translate some of our important documents into other languages, so which ones do we pick, right? Because the population of non-English speakers varies from place to place to place. And what's true in Spokane may not be true in Denver, may not be true in Chicago or Miami, and may not be the same as Tacoma. And so we have to do some work into figuring out locally what is the makeup of the people that use our facility. And there's different ways. There's a couple different organizations we look to help with that. One is our local school district. Right? The school district has tends to put more resources in figuring out what languages their kids speak at home, and so we can use that as one benchmark to help us figure out which languages to look at. Right? Why did I start talking about this? Oh, valuing different cultures, right? So that's an example of how it is that when we look at our body of work, other people are noticing our body of work too, people outside of the organization. And when they look at our body of work, are they seeing our value of treating all our clients, all our residents, all our end users with equal respect, or are they seeing something else? Let's see. So for our work at my health department, the previous discussions about culture and about race and about ethnicity and those sorts of things helped us prepare for these sets of discussions that were really helpful and instrumental in guiding some of the new work we wanted to undertake, and maybe retiring some of the work that didn't seem so important as it had before. Taking a look at how our own culture as an organization influences our behavior. There's all sorts of different things about what we do that tells people outside of our agency what we value, right? So ranging from things like the snacks we bring to a meeting. Right? We're the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. It's inconsistent with our core mission to provide snacks for a meeting that are filled with fat or deep. We wouldn't want to bring French fries to a meeting. As much as I love French fries, that's not the sort of thing we want to bring to a meeting, because it's inconsistent with what our values are. Right? We also want to consider how culture affects our residents as they come to us. Sue mentioned earlier, like the historical context of our area. One of the things we spent a fair amount of time looking at was the historical cultural makeup of our area. We took a look at and drew a timeline about who came to Pierce County in a chronological order, right? And we go back thousands and thousands of years when the Puyallups, the Puyallup tribe of Indians, first came here, and they established their residency here way before there was the United States of America, right? According to the Puyallups, they've been here since time immemorial, right? And so that plays a role in us recognizing where we are in our in Pierce County. After that, there were waves of other people that came, folks from Spain, people from France, all sorts of explorers came, people from England. After Europeans came, there were other waves of folks that came in too. Workers from China came in, folks from Mexico started to come in. African-American servicemen came. Our situation is a little unique in that we have a really, really, really big military base that sits kind of in the southeast, southwest corner of our county, and and so we get a fair amount of influx of residents from that base. And so one of the after the First World War, more African American families started staying in Pierce County. And it's important to recognize this because when we look out and offer our programs and offer our various tactics to increase public health, we notice that different people participate at different rates. And so why is that? Right? And so some of the why for that has historical roots in this. It's important for us to recognize that not everyone has experienced government in the same way. There's lots of ugly things that happen in Pierce County, in Tacoma specifically, way back in the late 1800s. Our mayor and some of his buddies essentially chased all the Chinese people out, like with guns and pitchforks and stuff like that. Just chased them out, brought them to a railroad station, and sent them off to some, they didn't care where, somewhere else. They went back to where the Chinese families were living and burned down all their houses, right? And so when we look around Tacoma right now, there's not a real strong Chinatown. And sometimes if you're not familiar with this part of the history, you wonder, well, why isn't there a Chinatown? There's one in Seattle, there's one in Vancouver, there's one in San Francisco, all these different cities up and down the coast have Chinatowns, but we don't. Well, this is one of the reasons why we don't. And sometimes this knowledge of historical experiences can go a long way to explaining how it is that some of our residents interact with us in the way that they do. And what this can do for us, this recognition can do for us, is that we can start to take that into account when building our relationships with our various clients and our various customers, and know that some of our residents are going to take different reassurances. They're going to take different timelines. It's going to take different strategies to involve different different parts of our resident base. And it's more complicated than what I'm saying, but it's really fulfilling, I think, and really insightful to go and take a look at specifically your area and who came to your area, when did they come to your area, and work that into your staff's knowledge base. Like we what was I just going to say? Our work with the Puyallup tribe of Indians has gotten better than it has been, but it's only since I think it's only since we started taking into account some of the historical interactions that public health has had with the Puyallup tribe of Indians that I think that we were able to acknowledge some of the prior missteps or prior misunderstandings, and bring those to the work and just upfront acknowledge, our two groups haven't always worked together really cleanly, and we recognize that, and we're gonna do better. We're gonna do everything we can to do better in the future, and we recognize in the past it hasn't always been sunshine and roses. So for us in our work, this is all part of the process of taking a look at how we want our customers and clients to experience our organization, and how are they actually experiencing the organization. And this exercise that I've just been talking about can give some perspective into, maybe give some insight as to why maybe they're experiencing our facility as it is. That maybe it isn't me, but maybe it's my predecessor from the 1970s, the person in my position in the 1970s who helped set the stage and helped make it difficult for me to do my work now. And so knowing all this, I think, is a really useful and really helpful thing. What this all builds to is taking a look at what do we do so what do we do with all this information? We have started taking a look at institutionalized racism and how policies and systems reinforce that the health outcomes that were developed um, uh, under institutionalized racism policies. So we've got this. We started working on a health equity tool, and this tool walks us through and asks us to, for ourselves, for our own programs, ask ourselves all these different questions. Some of them we've been talking about today, to help us gain a little bit of perspective. With those folks that were working on the Redlining Maps, they had a hard time gaining perspective. There are these tools that can help us gain this perspective. It asks us to take a look at, okay, who are all our audiences? Do they really all experience this this project in the same way? What do they see? How are the people that are being impacted by the work? Do they have any say into how the work gets carried out? And so using tools like that, it can help make our work not just like feel better. I mean, this really isn't about doing work because it's all, it makes you all bubbly, but it's being more effective, right? Because the thing that we're judged by isn't by how good people feel about us. Really, if our work is judged by how long we live. That's the ultimate goal. We want to make people live longer and experience their life in a more healthful way. If they can be healthy mentally, physically, and socially and emotionally, then that's the end goal. And if some of these things help us feel better about our work, that's in my head, that's kind of like a bonus. Right? And it's asked us to look at our work and figure out, are there policies at play within our organization that help contribute to the health outcomes in our county? It's taken a look at and asked us to figure out how race affects our work and how it doesn't. Right? For some of our work that isn't really so much affected by race. I mean, there's things like lead, lead poisoning. There's lead in paint in a bunch of the houses that were built before 1970. And lead affects people. Doesn't matter how old you are. It affects littler kids more than older kids, but it affects everybody, right? It's not discriminatory. So there's some work that isn't so much affected by race, but there's some work that is. The thing that's been probably more challenging is taking these types of discussions and making them okay to happen across the organization, right? So between us here in a small organization, if we enter this conversation thinking, yeah, I want to learn more about institutionalized racism. I want to learn more about cultural competency. That's a really positive way to enter a conversation. That is, I don't know what your organization was like, but there's about 275 people that work in my organization. Not everyone's on board with that, right? And so taking these conversations to a widespread audience, it takes knowing that it's not going to happen right away. It takes knowing that it's going to be difficult work, that sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. It takes knowing that and being able to recognize small little steps. I was just talking to one of my colleagues out in the hall. When I first started working here, I had this really quick conversation with one of my bosses. And I had just come from the city of Seattle and Pacific Science Center, where we had done a lot of work around institutionalized racism and looking at power and race and how those two things fit together. And so I brought it up to my supervisor that there are these awesome workshops we can that we can learn more about institutionalized racism and how that is at play in the Columbia Pierce County Health Department. And my one of the program managers here recognized that institutionalized racism was a thing, but he didn't think it happened here at the health department. That was something that took place elsewhere, right? And it kind of put me on my heels because I couldn't imagine a bureaucracy that wasn't in some way affected by institutionalized racism, right? But that's how it was back when I started working here. In my conversation with my colleague, we had this awesome conversation about how we could work together how we could work together to look at encouraging conversations about race, how we could work together to take steps to incorporate not just discussions about race in our work, but what implications are there for power that our institution holds in these different discussions of race, because race and power are really interwoven together. Once you get through the confusing part of it, it becomes really clear that race and power are two things that are intertwined, and it's really difficult to talk about one without talking about the other. And so it's been difficult for me to notice the different steps that have taken place over the years, but just having these two bookmarked ends was, for me, was really striking. It was striking that I could have that conversation out in the open, and that both he and I were in places of influence within our organization. So it wasn't that we were frontline staff having this conversation, but we were members of leadership teams. And so that was very encouraging. And that's a long way of saying that there are going to be little tiny steps that it's going to pay for you to recognize as many of these small steps as you can, because the work tends to blend together, and it sometimes feels hard, and it sometimes feels never ending. And we talked really earlier on about like the end line. What's the goal? What's the end line? It's a process, right? And there sometimes isn't a clear finish line, because there's always some way to make things better. And if you don't see a really clear finish line, the thing that's super important is you recognize the incremental improvements that you have over time. And I think that's probably one of the things that we could do better here at the health department is really recognizing, and so not just recognize, but celebrate the small victories. All these little tiny victories, these little tiny steps add up over time.
Mm-hmm. Len, this is Sue. So I have I know you have some discussion questions, but I was intrigued by what you were, excuse me, saying about the Puyallup tribe and this historical context, because I think, every community has those, and just beginning to kind of understand that context of what was happening before and what people are experiencing. So I just want to name that, because I think in one of the sites that I'm working with, there's some stuff happening where they're starting to realize that they really need to kind of go deeper in that. What I'm curious about, excuse me, is so I think part of the activity, right, or the process, I guess is a better way to say it, is just naming it, like recognizing it's there. Mm-hmm. But if you want to get to kind of the nirvana state, is what I always call it, right, then I'm curious about how you have, or if you're aware of, where people, in the spirit, I think, of cultural humility, have worked to create a common understanding of what it is together, as opposed to going and learning, oh, this is what's happening, and then the organization does something on their own. Because I could see where that's happening. And so I'm just kind of curious about that piece of, how then, once there's that awareness of how do you work together to kind of come to a place where you can offer services in a different way?
Well, there's here in the state of Washington, our state does a really nice job of offering some workshops on how to work with tribes, because there's any number of legal and mainly legal divisions between tribal authorities and other branches of government. And the state of Washington offers some workshops on recognizing what sort of power the federally recognized tribes have, and where that matches up with my health department's authority, right? And so acknowledging that the tribes have certain legal rights, and working with those was one of the things that for us, I think, helped us, because our health department, that is, one time wanted to push a non-smoking in public places policy across the state. And so we did. We worked really hard to do that. What we didn't do, in retrospect, I recognize that we didn't do enough in this was in those really early discussions about what does it mean to ban smoking in public places. There are tribes here that have public facilities, casinos and hotels and different things like that, right? And we don't have the authority to go in there and tell them what to do in their casino or in their hotels. What we do have is the ability to find out what their values are, right? And so is smoking a huge concern for them, or is it a different kind of concern, or what exactly is the nature of the concern of smoking for the people in the tribe that have power over the hotels? And so those were some missteps we took, but I think now knowing with the state's help how to work more with tribes as opposed to trying to push tribes around, that was a huge revelation for us. In general, recognizing that that we have more tools at our disposal than regulations, right? So we have my health department has a lot of different regulations about where you can do certain things and where you can't do certain things. And all of these regulations, by and large, I'll say all of them because I can't think of one that doesn't. All these regulations are intended to increase public health, increase public safety. We know people will be safer if their food is kept at a certain temperature or below, and if the rice is above a certain temperature, they tend to get sick. And so our regulations say keep it below a certain temperature, right? So we have all these regulations. That's not the only way we can help people keep safe, right? That's not the only thing that we can do to help keep people live longer. There's other things we can do. And recognizing some of these other mechanisms as valid, as useful, and as effective tools is something that we continue to work on. Right? Because sometimes in some regulatory situations, it can feel like we're abdicating power if we consider trying to talk our way through an issue, or if we first ask what the values are of certain certain populations. What are your values? It sometimes feels like we're abdicating that power, which is a really difficult thing to experience sometimes. In fact, I don't think that's what's happening. I think when we ask, how do you experience our regulations, I don't think we're abdicating power. I think what we're doing is looking for ways to make those regulations more effective. Because if there are certain things that our various populations will respond to better than others, if we adopt, it can affect how we prioritize what we choose to include in our regulations, if that makes sense. So, so I guess those two things, recognizing that you don't have to push someone to make them to increase health, and to recognize that that we're not the biggest. I don't know where to go with that analogy. We don't have as much authority sometimes as we think we do. Recognizing that we share this power with our partners and our residents. I don't know if that really answers your question.
That's okay. You know, and I'm not just thinking of tribes. I mean, I know that's, you know, I use that as an example, but I just think, you know, in a lot of, you know, one community that I'm thinking of is LA, and there is there's a hospital that's actually going to be torn down.
Mm-hmm.
And this hospital was used for forced sterilization of immigrant women. And so they're just starting to kind of understand the trauma and really kind of going into the history and trying to figure out how do they move forward. So I think it's like, I think what you're saying is really important. It's just understanding and the value, right? And I think the last piece that you said is just by doing that, you're not abdicating power. You're just seeking really to understand more from a place of humility, right? Like, I don't really understand, which that in and of itself takes a lot, right? Just being able to say, help me to understand what's going on because I don't know, right? Anyway, so thank you.
One of my great lessons at Pacific Science Center, I would stand for part of my job early on in my career there. I got to stand in front of people and do science presentations. It was awesome. It was fun. I took liquid nitrogen and shrunk balloons down to almost nothing. I worked with static electricity, all sorts of different things. One of the things I learned really early on was that it's okay to say I don't know. That it's often better to say I don't know and try to make up something on the spot, because my ego would often early on in my career would urge me to make up an answer to satisfy the person in front of me, and make it seem like I knew what was going on. I found out really quickly that it's okay to say I don't know, and I think that's what in a larger sense, I think that's a little what we're doing with some of this work. We're saying, I don't really know how you experience this, and so I want to find out. Right? And so that's just to reiterate what you were just saying.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm not a fan of the term cultural competency, because it feels like a checkbox, as opposed to more about how you would approach it. And I think, just being able to say, like, help me to understand, like, in a way that values where they're coming from. So yeah, exactly.
And to be appreciative if someone offers that. I met a young woman the other day. We were going to work on a project together, and we were going around introducing ourselves, and I was shaking hands, and I got to her, and because of her cultural upbringing, it was not proper for her to shake my hand, and so I kind of stumbled across that. But I thought the thing is to feel appreciative when those things are brought up, because the young woman was not trying to embarrass me. She's not trying to do anything that was disrespectful, but she was helping me see that my inclination to shake hands, which I thought was universal, turns out that's not really a universal greeting. It's not appropriate for everybody. And she was kind and gentle with that. But even if she wasn't kind and gentle, it's incumbent upon me to take those learning experiences for what they are and appreciate them, as opposed to getting defensive about them.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
So, other questions? Y'all have any other questions?
Yeah, I'd love to hear. I'm going to pick on Deborah. I'm thinking about, some of our conversations, and just wondering if you have any reflections or anything on what you're hearing today. I don't know if she can, Deborah Ward, if she can hear me and speak.
I can't hear you. Wait a second. Oh, shoot.
Let's see, Deborah, do you have your phone? Did you call in?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had some technology problems, so I had both on.
That's okay.
No, I mean, I don't really have any comments at this time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's
eventful with all of that, but
yeah, no, that's okay. I just was thinking about, kind of your historical work you're doing, and just know if there was any reflection. So
I can relay a couple examples from our health department work that was influenced by some of these concepts. If that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
We have a program that that helps remediate underground storage tanks. And underground storage tanks are things like diesel tanks for home heating, or fuel tanks at old, little gas stations. And one of the things that was distressing for me to find out, that oftentimes these underground storage tanks, it's not really a question of do they leak, because they'll leak. It's how much do they leak. And so, so we have a whole program that's dedicated to remediating these sites with underground storage tanks. For a long time, we prioritized the work as they came in, right? What we began to notice is that the work that was getting done mainly happened in the areas of our town that was experiencing better public health than some of the others. Right, the requests were coming in from all over the place, but the work that tended to get done first was in the areas that where people tended to live longer. And we took a look at that real hard, because that was kind of a startling realization that we were participating in this with our policies that reinforced the existing pattern of certain areas living longer than others, right? And what we realized was that there was not a regulation that anywhere in our books that said that dictated how we approach or how we prioritize our work. So what we started to do was take a look at areas of town that were experiencing poorer health, where there were shorter life expectations, and prioritizing our work in those areas first. The benefit to doing that is that oftentimes these areas where the life expectancy is shorter, the property values are also are lower, and by remediating properties in that area, the net increase was actually bigger than for remediating areas in the longer expectation sites. And so it's not something that was really obvious, you know what I mean? I mean, it wasn't something that kind of jumped out after going to these workshops. That wasn't the sort of thing that just popped out at us. But it was only after taking a look at, it was a reorganization of that project that we had a chance to really look at all the nuts and bolts and take a look at why we were doing work as we were doing it, that this opportunity kind of showed up. So we're now able to prioritize our work by the part of town that experiences worse health, gets their work done first. Another thing that's sort of like that is that we have been working out in this rural part of the county for a long time, and our health department does a lot of work around septic systems and drinking water wells, and that's kind of what we're known for out in this rural part of the county. And we were able to find by going out there and listening to what they needed. We found out that this little community they'd already prioritized what they thought their community needed. Transportation was really high on their list. They had this whole list of things that they wanted to do. It didn't really match up with ours because we don't do a lot with transportation, but it was helpful to find out what they value. It was also really helpful to find out that they wanted our presence. They had a small community office, and twice a week we put up some rent so that we would staff this office twice a week. And so we would send somebody out there, and we didn't really know exactly what to expect, but we started to send staff out there twice a week to answer questions. And we would have brochures, we would have forms, we would have different things that we could take out there. And over time, what's happened out there is that this community has really started to embrace us. It's a part of town called a part of the county called the Key Peninsula, and they've really started to embrace our work out there. It was really interesting. I went out there for a meeting to describe this one project the health department was sponsoring. After the presentation, there were some questions from the community council out there and I was about ready to answer the questions, but our fellow non-health department staff from this office answered the questions instead. I found that to be particularly powerful, that these folks had embraced us so much that they knew what we were doing, they knew what our processes were, they knew how to answer our questions. And it's something that wouldn't have happened if we didn't take the time to listen to what they wanted from us. It wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have spent a fair amount of time just showing up. A lot of the work is showing up. Because so much of the time, what happens is that we go into an area and we want to do some work around health equity, and so we show up for as long as the grant periods last. We're there for a year, sometimes 2 years. But what this is telling me, and I knew this before, but what this is really graphically showing me is that it matters that you show up consistently over a long period of time. And if you can do that, your credibility goes way up, and people trust you way more, and and you become part of the community as opposed to the health department at the community. If that makes sense. So showing up makes a lot of difference.
Were you hoping to talk about some of these questions or these things they can use, or?
Oh, yeah, there's one more slide.
Ah.
For your work, for our work, when we approach new work, these are some of the questions that we ask ourselves, right? And we talked about asset-based some asset-based work. This is akin to that, right? Because we take a look at what this is when we do this workshop for our staff. These are some of the things we ask them to consider about their particular projects. Right? We want them to consider what their strengths are, what do they bring to the table, and where do they see themselves? What gaps do they see? What don't they do so well? Because both those things are really important. Being self-aware is a super important part of this work, and to consider what their ideal is. So that exercise we did really early on about what does your ideal interaction look like. They do something akin to that, but for their program specific. And what would it mean to get closer to that, and how would we do that? Like, what are some steps that we could take between now and then? And so for anybody that's thinking of incorporating work with health equity or race or cultural humility or any of these things, these are like the foundational questions that we ask when we're starting a new project. And I would think that a lot of work that may be done. But if you don't already do have some sort of process like this to start to help scope your work, some of these things are I think have helped us not make mistakes that we probably have been making for years and years and years. So I guess I wasn't necessarily thinking that we would talk about these.
Okay, those other questions, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And Len, is this actually your last slide? Is there?
It is the last. Well, the last slide has my name and contact.
Okay, great.
So.
Very good. So questions for the group, like anything not clear, any takeaways or ahas? I'd love to hear from some of you. Excuse me. Got a quiet group today. It's Monday. You bet. Very insightful. Thank you.
I have a couple of slides that I didn't include in the presentation that you might be interested in seeing. I'll just quickly go through some of these.
Okay.
This is our. These are some of the maps of our county. This one talks about infant deaths per zip code. And it's interesting when you look at these maps that take a look at health outcomes in our county. They go back and reflect. Here's another one. This is life expectancy. Color and the dot size are the number of colors. It's interesting to take a look at maps like this and compare them back to the redlining maps. This is our map that was created back in 1937 that prescribed areas of town that got better loan rates and those areas of town that they didn't really want to lend to. And if we had a high resolution picture of this, you would see that each of these colored areas have a letter, either A, B, or C, or D. A is the highest rated and D is the lowest rated. And it's eerie how close this map represents health outcomes in today. One of the things that tells me is that things like policy, which I always thought were really boring topics, not very interesting. I'm like, oh, geez, we're going to talk about policy now. It's super important because the effects can be long lasting. So this is from 1937. That's what 80 some years ago, and it represents its influence still reverberates through our town today, because the families that live in the green areas, the A areas, they've accumulated more wealth during those last 80 years than the families that live in the red areas, which means that families in the green areas have more income, they have more resources to pay for things like healthcare, to pay for things like organic fruit, stuff like that. So it's just highlighted the importance of policy for me.
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
don't know if you can see this very well, but these are the notes that I was talking about earlier, which describe some of the different areas. If you look towards the bottom line, line 6 on both of these, it gives a name, location, Tacoma, Washington, security grade A, in area number 1. Okay, that's the highest rated part in our town, and it talks about what a great view the place has, and this big old mansion, Warehouser Mansion, it talks about what an amazing place it is. The next one down is the one that talks about the Negro families that live in the area, and they're the reason that
Wow.
the security grade B.
Who did these? Like who wrote these?
This was an organization called the Home Loan Corporation.
Oh, okay, so that happened there. Okay.
Yeah, they preceded the FHA, and so when World War II ended, and all the GIs were coming back home and they're all getting loans, these were the documents that informed who got loans and who didn't get loans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was aware of kind of redlining in the maps and kind of all, but I've never seen this. Like this is wow. Just actually seeing this here is, yeah.
Yeah, they weren't really shy about it. There's others that really specifically say it's because of this black family rules here that it's not a C, that it's not a B. That's the only reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so, part of what this does for me, it makes me feel. Sometimes in my work, I feel a little shy about talking about race so much. When I see this, it takes away some of that hesitancy, because that's race has been part of our federal workings for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. I'm not bringing anything new by talking about race now. I'm not bringing anything new to the conversation, but I'm helping maybe bring a different perspective to the conversation.
Well, and I think, I'm just going to repeat what I said, this is the historical, like this is what's happening and still happening. And, from where we sit anyway, or, just like we want everybody like to have good quality life, right? Health and well-being. And without acknowledging this and kind of recognizing it and kind of addressing, like heading it head on, like it's never going to happen, right? So I just, so I thank you for sharing these. I think it's interesting. So I know, yeah, we're just about out of time. You know, I'd love to hear some folks. Patty, I'm going to pick on Patty because Patty's always pretty insightful as well. And any thoughts that you have just from what you're hearing today? I think she took herself off mute. Patty, are you able to speak? Uh-oh, she's having audio. Oh no, the darn audio. Yeah, so that's okay.
So this is Deborah.
Great.
Just a couple of reflections. I think for the most part, just to say how I appreciate you all having this type of webinar, and Lynn, your presentation was, you know, exceptional. This is hard work, and I would just encourage the different agencies that are represented to really work through what does this look like in your community. I think that I'm always challenged by how to do real health equity work that really matters, that to not get caught up in the lingo and the lip service to it, but to really make it a reality in your community. And so some of the discussion questions and information that you presented, Lynn, I can see that being very helpful in my agency. I'm with the YWCA San Gabriel Valley. You know, our mission is to eliminate racism. So this really ties into our social justice work, and really trying to find, particularly in San Gabriel Valley, we're very diverse, and we're actually a great cultivating area to cultivate equity, because we have just about every culture represented in our area. And so just thank you.
Hi, Sue, can anybody hear me? This is Patty.
Yeah, hey Patty.
Oh, so sorry. For some reason I kept being booted off the audio. So I had to dial in again. I don't know if Len addressed my question, but so yeah, we are working on trying to train our staff here on cultural competency. Yvette actually did a short presentation during our annual staff meeting, just sort of explaining concepts and definitions. But when we, were planning, we kind of kept running into this, like, is this word too academic? Like, things like Eurocentrism or something like that. It's like, how do you sort of explain the importance of this topic but not get too into the weeds about, using terms that are just don't resonate with people.
Yeah, it seems like the more comfortable that we get in this discussion, the more direct that the conversations can get. It's sometimes early on in the conversations while people are feeling a little bit uneasy, maybe, or unsure about how much to trust our colleagues, that words like Eurocentrism and stuff like that tend to be more comfortable. But as we get deeper into the work, it seems to me that the conversations oftentimes get more direct and more personal. I mean, many people have direct personal experiences with a lot of these things that maybe they're not so keen on sharing up front, and it sometimes takes a while to develop that report to bring some of these things out.
Great, thank you.
Mm. Well, it's certainly not a one-time conversation. I appreciate what you just said. Like the more we talk about it,
Yeah.
the more comfortable. So I just think that's a great way to close. And you know, Lynn, I know you sent me the slides, but I'm wondering if all of these slides were part of what you sent to me, or just the other ones.
These last couple slides were not part of that because I didn't really think about talking about them.
Yeah.
But I can send you these too.
Great. Great. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And on one of the slides is my contact information.
Oh, great. Okay.
I'm happy to correspond by email or phone or whatever that seems helpful for you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you, and have a great rest of your day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.